So, you're excited to fight chaos this week on the 15th of March.
Looks like chaos.
Good for you. I don't know about you, but I fight chaos every single week. I make my bed. I stand up straight with my shoulders back. I pet cats when I encounter them out and about in the world. But if you're as excited as me to fight chaos when your life is in chaos because you've been playing too much Strangers of Paradise, you've just come out of a global pandemic, and the world is on fire, then you probably have a small gripe with Dungeons and Dragons. And that'll be because D&D combat kind of really sucks. So today, inspired by a game What Looks Good and the last mainline Final Fantasy game that I played, by God, that boy band could fight. Here are my top tips and homebrew rules to make your combat flashier and more cinematic in a pinch. I'm Sam, and welcome to Dungeon Brews.
I become chaos.
As with all things in life, there are three solutions to clunky D&D combat. The first, make combat feel faster. The second, make it feel like more is happening in combat. And the third, make it feel like there's weight in every action that your players make. So, my first tip is what I like to call side initiative. The crux of this is to make sure that your players never have to sit down for more than a few minutes at a time between their turns. And there's two homebrew rules that you can implement which help this. The first rule is the simplest, but can feel like it takes away a bit of agency from your players. So, what you do is you randomly select one of your players to roll initiative for the group. Then, based on the roll of that lone player, you can build turn order, and then when you get to your player's turn, you just play through all of their turns one by one at effectively the same time in turn order. It means that players don't necessarily have to be paying as much attention to what's going on in order to prevent uncomfortable pauses, but it's not my preferred homebrew rule in this instance, and it doesn't necessarily make combat more cinematic. What I like to do is I get all of my players to roll initiative, then I will go through at the top of the turn and take each and every single one of their planned moves. I get them to roll to hit, but they hold that number. You then run through turn order, but narrate in a cinematic fashion like you're watching a movie, and then as you get to each of your players' actions, you get them to reveal their role. At that point, you can then branch off in either the direction of failure or the direction of success. If they hit, they roll damage. This shouldn't take too long because they can already have focused on the exact numbers they're potentially going to have to roll. And then snap, you have the damage, and you can carry on narration to the next player or the next monster and flow all of the way through. This allows combat to be, one, incredibly free-flowing, and second of all, it allows you to narrate combat more effectively as a DM. It gives you a little bit of time to plan as you're going through and taking down what your players want to do, to work out what's going to happen within your narration, while also benefiting from that initial homebrew rule I suggested, wherein the players don't have to sit around for too much and not doing anything. They all line up their turns and then they can listen expectantly to you narrating. The next thing is about paying attention to what actually happens in combat. So any given player's turn, as you full well know at this point, is the equivalent of about 6 seconds. Now, I don't know if you've watched many movies. I have. I'm a little bit of a film connoisseur. It's highly unlikely when you're watching a movie that an action hero will swing their blade once within 6 seconds. So the purpose of the second homebrew rule is to capture the cut and thrust of combat to fill out the remainder of those 6 seconds. Once you've played through a turn, what you're going to do is get all of your players to roll a single d20. It needs to be unmodified, and you're looking for the player who will roll the highest number. At that point, that player is in control. What you then want that player to do is roll their percentage dice twice. What this does is calculate how much damage is going to happen to the players in the cut and thrust of combat, how much damage is going to happen to the monsters in the cut and thrust of combat. So that first pair of percentage die, that's the damage that one of your players is going to take. The poor player who accidentally rolled lowest on their d20 is going to take that percentage of 10% of their total health. This is potentially brutal, but it's going to keep players on their toes and mean they have to pay attention to healing, even those individuals who are hiding away from combat. The second percentage die, the same thing for the monsters. However, it's going to affect every single monster in the encounter. They're going to lose that percentage of 10% of their health. What this does is it allows you to play into your players' power fantasy, because as soon as you have these percentages, you can begin to narrate the cut and thrust of combat between turns. What would be those huge pull-out shots of armies fighting against each other in a movie? The crux of this is it just keeps combat exciting, and then simply move into the next turn of combat where they can take back agency and the fight will continue. And my final homebrew rule, slash I would frankly say this one is a tip, is to keep things moving. At no point in time should your players be stuck in the same situation for more than 3 turns. Now, there's a few ways you can go about this. You can either change the environment, change the conditions of combat, or bring in more individuals to the fight. My recommendation would be to often focus on the first of these, because you can make superficial changes which don't actually alter too much, but can allow your players to strategize a little bit more. So for example, you can have a chandelier which plummets down from the ceiling. You can have a room be on fire and it's slowly becoming engulfed by fire. There's a reason that Battle Royale games have these circles which close. It's to force you into the encounter and to change the conditions of that encounter. And that kind of covers the second thing. So the final thing, implementing other creatures. There's a couple of ways to do this. The best and most balanced way to do this is to not play all of your cards at the top of combat. So for example, if your player is fighting against a boss, you can have them have minions which will appear sporadically throughout the fight. This does two things. One, it means the players have more to focus on than just I swing my sword at this boss twice in this turn and twice in next turn. Oh, I'm going to use a Divine Smite this turn. It means that they have to strategize a little bit more. But on top of that, it also gets around D&D combat's second largest issue, other than it being slightly slow at times, which is that the only way to really increase challenge is to alter action economy. For example, as a player, if you can attack twice in a turn, you suddenly become twice as potent. If you can roll twice as many dice, that's not necessarily the case. My best recommendation for bringing together those three elements is to sometimes offer your players combat encounters that aren't strictly combat encounters. They are encounters where combat is a threat to them, but potentially they have to move from A to B, they have to escort someone, they have to navigate through a snowstorm without freezing to death. Combat crucially doesn't have to be combat, but you can provide your players the opportunity to scratch that combat itch by having a combat encounter wrapped inside another problem. Anyway, I've been Sam, this has been Dungeon Brews, where I aggressively shoehorn things from video games, movies and TV shows into my favourite D&D games, and if you want access to more Homebrew every single week, do not forget to subscribe to Roll Together RPG. See you next time.